So this is the template for the digital plates. We're going to be working on the second set. So I have my digital plates here. I'm going to drag it into Photoshop and I'm going to select the second page and make sure it's an RGB. 120 resolution is fine. And I'm going to click OK. So this is the plates for the analogous color hue. There are directions on the plate. Gradient from hue 1 to hue 2 should yield hue 3 in the middle. So we're going to be working with gradients as ways to mix color. You can find the gradient tool underneath the paint bucket tool. And if you click in the box in the very top, you're given the option of creating the gradient. So remember earlier today, we selected a color harmony. So someone give me their color harmony. And if you're having a hard time figuring out what are my analogous colors, I want you to go ahead and open up. I'm going to also drag again into Photoshop. So let's cancel this. I'm going to open up that color wheel as well, because I want to use the numbers as a way to select my color. So someone select a hue, any hue.
200.
200. Okay. Do you want to, it's a little easier. I'm just going to say this. If you select one of the numbers that are already here on the.
Okay.
So how about 216?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, let's start with 216. So when I go here, and I open up the gradient menu here on top are the options. They might also be in the Windows pane depending on how you have your setup. So the first thing I'm going to select is hue 1. So hue 1 we said was 216, right? 216, top right hand corner. And then if I go back to my digi plates, the next hue in line will be, and you want a little bit of a growth between the two. So I wouldn't do 3 directly. You might not get a lot of variation, but if you do 3 base hues, so our next hue is going to be 288. So I go back to my gradient here, double click, and who remembers the numbers for this next hue? 288, right? Pull it in the top right hand corner. And how I'm creating that is I'm just clicking, single click or double click inside one of these toggles here. And that'll show me the color that's there. You can move these around to make the gradient shorter or longer. You can change the amount of colors, and you want a pretty good area in the middle. So hue 1 is blue, hue 2 was 288. So what's 288?
Purple.
Purple, correct. And in the middle, you'll get blue purple. So there's my blue purple. And I want to make sure I have quite a bit of blue purple to choose from. So you can move this center toggle around and click OK. We're going to go back to using the marquee tool and select a marquee. And when we select the gradient tool, we're going to follow this line in the center for hue 1 and hue 2. Command D to deselect. Now you have your gradient. You're going to go diagonally from one side to the other and create this U-shaped gradient step scale here. So you're going to go from a smooth gradient scale to a step scale. I'm going to use my marquee tool too, which is here, shortcut M. And then we're also going to use the eyedropper tool, shortcut I. So I'm going to start with my base hue. I'm going to change this tool from gradient to paint bucket. You can also shortcut G, and I'm going to fill this. I'm going to keep clicking until I fill that with the base hue. I'm going to repeat the same using the marquee tool, shortcut I, eyedropper tool, and get my base, my third hue. and place it there. M for marquee tool. I for eyedropper tool. G for paint bucket tool. M for marquee tool. I for eyedropper tool. G for paint bucket tool. I'm selecting M for the marquee tool. I for eyedropper. So I should almost be in the center at this point. G for paint bucket. M for marquee. Now this hue here would be right in the center. A cool thing you can do with the eyedropper tool, if you click and hold, see how that circle around it changes. And I'm going to select something that is pretty close in the center to a purple blue. And the cool thing about this circle is that I see purple, and I could look at the purple side of the circle and see if that blue purple looks more blue, and I could go to the blue side and see if it looks more purple. And that'll tell me the color, like relatively where I should be with the eyedropper tool, right? And then G for paint bucket tool. And I'm just clicking in the area, and then I have my purple blue. And so on and so forth, right? So just to take a look, let's go back to the gradient. Make sure it's set up right. So I have I think my 288 is that, yeah, purple. So making sure, and I can double check too, just to make sure I selected, but use the eyedropper tool and double click. I can see, yes, it's 288. It's the right purple. I can check that hue there. And then I can go in here, double check. It's 267 in the hue, click OK and see, well, I need to get to 252. So I want to be able to see 252. So it's one thing to place it in the color picker, but I really want you to be able to see it. So you'll continue moving forward. G for paint bucket tool, Salon gradient. M for marquee tool. I for eyedropper tool. G for paint bucket tool. M for our marquee tool. I for eyedropper. G for paint bucket. So Command D to deselect the marquee. So I have my gradient moving from blue to purple here. To make your swatches on here, you want to do the same thing first by setting up your hue 1, hue 2, and hue 3. To do this, eyedropper tool and that base hue. M for marquee tool. I for eyedropper tool. G for paint bucket tool. M for marquee tool. I for eyedropper tool. G. So here I have my 3 base hues. Command D to deselect. I want you to match in value and also explore chroma with all of these different swatches. So this one here, it's a mid-tone. So I want to select a hue, value, and saturation. And how I want to do that is I can use the eyedropper tool and just select anywhere a color that matches in that value, place it into that box, and then I want you to explore the hue and saturation within that particular hue. So you can take it, move it down in saturation using the saturation. So that's a mid-tone gray. And make different choices. Now let's go to, this is a very, very dark blue or a dark value. And I'm going to choose blue because blue is a little bit darker in value, and I'll select that. Might have to make a new layer. There we go. Eyedropper tool. paint bucket tool. And then I can either use the hue, brightness, and saturation, which I want you to play with the sliders. You can also go here to hue, brightness, and saturation sliders and move one of these. So this changes it and adds more black. And now I can place that particular color in that space. So you want to get a variation of this particular color relationship, exploring hue, value, and chroma. So I want to see some desaturated, some very dark darks with high chroma, and some very light lights with low chroma. That's one way to explore. So I'm going to explore this particular one here. And let's talk about, so that's a very dark with high chroma. Let's take a look at a very low chroma, high value. So I have my hue, brightness, and saturation open now. If I want to go down in and add more gray, I have to move in saturation and brightness. And now I can explore the color a little bit more desaturated and lighter. And if it's too much of a chromatic gray, you can increase the saturation just a tiny bit. So it's a way to make quick adjustments to the color without having to start all the way over from scratch. So you'll complete that adding variation in hue and chroma throughout the entire scale. And notice how I'm not putting all of this color in this row and all of this color. You want to spread it out with lots of different choices within this color relationship.